two that's traveling so fast, so dangerous. Well, let's go back.
Speaking of modern day airplanes,
You can only fit maybe a couple hundred onto an airplane when you could fit a couple thousand onto an airship. Number one, it's graceful, but number two, you can fit way more people. You can have way more facilities on them. It's like almost like a traveling city. So the airships provided something landing somewhere you're not supposed to.
to think, if your fear of flying is caused by open waters, in the case of an emergency, you would now have a way safely to dock on a boat, and the fear of landing could be comforted by a slow docking airship.
Things like the Eiffel Tower, which we were told was built for a World's Fair, but there's Eiffel Towers everywhere. This will give you an opportunity for the blue to come into your city and roll around and get straight out and it delivers you to the place where you want to be. Now, don't think this is beyond possibility. We actually did it. Hindenburg used to cover that to the top of the Empire State Building. Doorway would come out, gantry would come out, and everyone would climb out of exactly into the Empire State Building, and they did it in the day Chicago. These buildings were
Believe it or not, it was not uncommon for people to fly in airships straight into downtown New York City and to dock those airships in the steeples, the finials, the towers, the spires of places like New York City, Chicago, major cities in Germany, England. Airships were docked.
And that's why the tops were designed so beautifully in these buildings.
I think that there was more than just airships. I think that the technology goes further than that. I think that these things were much more powerful, and I think that they went further than we could ever imagine to lands that we're not told about.
Behind the scenes, they're still making these, but we wouldn't have access for making our own.
If you wanted to build an airship today, you can, because NASA owns 99% of the helium. The tech back then was possibly even more than what we have now. There's videos in the 1930s, 1940s of hoverboards and portable scooters that ran off of electricity. They used to have self-parking cars.
Right when photography was invented, you have these electric trolleys running wireless around cities. 20 years later, they'd all be breaking down, then went on to wires, then went on to the slower Edison electric grid.
And remember that they have much, much more than what they're giving us. They are slowly giving us back the technology that was once here, that they found from the previous civilization.
It's funny, right? Because they drop it back in doses, pretend like they're the heroes to reintroduce it. But meanwhile, that very thing that was designed to create freedom and creativity within humanity is now spun to be used for manipulation and control. But it's dropped in those doses where we just accept it, and the line gets pushed further and further and further, and people just sit back and they're just like, this is life. Wireless energy, powered by the ether, existed way before big oil. We all know how dirty the oil companies are, but to think about the things we could have if they never existed.
An oil refining process was invented in 1854 by somebody in Pittsburgh. By 1870, John Rockefeller and Henry Flanders established the Standard Oil Company. And so it was like they needed to get a replacement energy source as quickly as possible. And they got energy source as quickly as possible. And they got it from just mining of resources.
Back in the 1800s, mainstream academia had 18 additional elements on the periodic table of elements, ether being one of those, right? And somewhere along the line, when Albert Einstein came out with his theory of relativity and started doing lectures across the country and the world, that anybody that spoke about ether at that time was completely, like, their reputation was destroyed. They lost their laboratories, they lost their teaching jobs, like what we saw in 2020.
A lot of times they'll leave the breadcrumbs. A lot of times the truth is in plain sight. So with that, Benjamin Franklin sending up the key on the tight. It's essentially, the average American sending up their drone with copper wire and harvesting electricity straight from the ether.
I think that the ancients understood very well that the ether is real, and that there's ways of channeling atmospheric energy, earth energy, and I think that they built their buildings with this in mind.
If we had access to free energy, imagine if you could just walk out into the forest anywhere you want, and you could just put up a little device, a resonator, to build yourself a castle, and just do it, levitate stones, and just create a kingdom. Well, that's not very good. That's why it's so dangerous to them.
That doesn't work when you're introducing an electric system that is dependent upon a power source, a bunch of wires, meters, and your output that you're having to pay for, where you become dependent on a system of scarcity. This old way of doing things based upon a system of abundance and plenty, because there's no end to the energy that's all around us all the time. There's another way of doing things. And we don't have to live in this way of constant crisis because of constant scarcity. We can break through it. I think that we're on the verge of rediscovering this knowledge at a very curious time where the ecosystem is rapidly falling apart.
Everyone knew there was an ether. Most buildings were constructed in that manner until they came in and started destroying things and indoctrinating us.
You go through and you start finding these correlations. Sections where how all these places are these all the stuff for landing sites, flying machines. You start to see that all of this stuff is way too similar all around the world for there not to be a single culture.
Many times these towers held old world technologies, such as bells, which would send out resonant frequencies into the community beyond. So many photos of bells being mounted up all over Europe. We're living in a time where we're waking up to what we so recently had.
The pipe organ is a healing machine. That's why it was integral to the construction of ancient Gothic cathedrals. The organ was the centerpiece of the church, the cathedral. Now, around the building, up, down, around, beneath, you had pipes and essentially speakers blasting this music into the cathedral.
In those things, it's beautiful organs and things stay close windows. Because the legs and specific properties and things, and they bigger like structures. They permit residents to the south out into the other outside. So everyone outside in the community is big evented, is on a higher state of consciousness, literally being the best they can. And you can see it in the pictures of these people in the day. Everyone is healthy.
Anyone who's been around for a full volume, live, authentic, great organ performance will tell you your bones rattle, your organs start to respond, your hairs on the back of your neck stand up, walk into a well-made stone cathedral, hear the pipe organ, sit there and saturate in the healing frequencies yourself. Cathedrals are something beyond just the center for worship. They are healing machines. The pipe organ of the cathedral is just one tiny little finger of this whole realm that we're talking about.
You've got Star Force, which I call a gateway because the same structure exists all over the earth, have been given to us as fortifications that were built. So they have an excuse for why it was built in whatever location. Then they have an excuse for why it was destroyed.
So in school we learned about one fire. We learned about the Chicago Great Fire.
In the case of the Great Chicago Fire, there was a lot of fanfare over this only how, kicking over the lantern,
The legend is that Mrs. O'Leary's cow in a barn kicked over a lantern that caused the entire fire, and poor Mrs. O'Leary and her family had their lives ruined because of this.
We only learned about Chicago, and I remember going to summer camp, and we're sitting around the campfire, and it's one dark night. She turned around and said, "You're hot time. You'll tell tonight. Fire, fire, fire." Yell fire, louder and louder with each verse, and we do this like 10 times to where it was echoing back to us across the lake. And now when I think about it, it's like how many kids growing up in America were singing this song about this stupid story. And what I realized is that it's like an incantation, and it's spellcasting. Where did this song come from? It's a story that they wanted the population to come to embrace and believe as part of the founding mythos of the country and who we are as a people. Well, lo and behold, as an architect with an interest in history, I come to find out only within the last few years that there were fires in every major city. And then I come to find out that it's not just wooden shanty town built out of matchsticks. We're looking at city after city after city with photographic evidence showing masonry buildings of the most exquisite kind.
Philadelphia, New York, Boston. You come down to Florida, Jacksonville, Miami. Every major city at one point was burned to the ground. Believe it or not, these were stone cities. These were megalithic stone cities, ancient metropolises that were burned down as if they were made very quickly. Now we can speculate as to what the source of that destruction was, from above, from below, arson, biblical destruction, you name it. Nonetheless, every major city in America, if not Europe, the entire world, saw a great devastation by a fire.
You'll see pictures of people walking on the sidewalk like no big deal. I mean, that's subjective, but I mean, that's what it looks like. The pictures are strange. The sequence of events that are supposed to have taken place are strange. So, there's just a lot of clues, if you will, that these weren't random events like somebody wants us to believe.
If you look at photos of even the buildings that still exist of the old world, they always give a backstory for why they took them down, but it's just curious why so many towers are missing now. So Pioneer Square is one of those examples, and this was built in the immediate aftermath of the fire in 1889. It's curious because it appears on a real estate map from before the fire in a fully intact form.
In order for stone to burn down, it has to reach 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. House fire reaches the temperature of 1,000 degrees. That's half. It's impossible for any stone building to be burning down. The 1800s and earlier fires may have been fake. They try to explain away multiple buildings with fire stories and multiple courthouses built on the same site in just a year with the same architect, and they're just demolishing these buildings.
This is exactly why my fireplace right here is made out of brick and stone. Because it doesn't melt. You gotta be an idiot to think that these forest fires are gonna be melting brick and stone. Use your head, guys.
As they are busy dismantling it in the 3D reality that we experience, it was part of a program to dismantle the old world and shock us into an acceptance of basically the new world order. About the new world, about the prospects for a new world order now within
It's the new order. Babylon, banging down your door. The war is hungry for war. We rally the troops and raise the sword. Once and for all, it's the new order. Babylon, begging for your soul. They coming and they want control. We burn their system to the floor. Once and for all, it's the new order.
publish it, print it. This is what happened. These are all the details. These are all the people involved. We got it down on record. So again, they're saying, okay, everything was built out of wood, like a Hollywood movie set. Didn't hold up. It caught fire. So we came in and we built all of these beautiful structures to make sure they wouldn't burn down again. And that is told repeatedly.
You look at any major city, they suffered this same fate. And I don't think it's a simple matter of, oh, they were just so stupid. They didn't know. They put candles all over the place and let their cities keep setting on fire. The stone courthouses, the stone banks, into smithereens. Now in Jacksonville, we actually had a fire where there are first-hand accounts of people who were escaping the fire, and once they thought they had escaped to a safe distance, were watching the fire, because that's what people used to do back then. You wasn't much of a fire department. They just said, well, it's burning. Let's take photos and watch. And what they actually did was they were sitting up on a hill watching Jacksonville burn. They said that things on their persons started spontaneously combusting. Pocket watches, buttons, things that were made of certain materials were combusting. This was happening back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Cities would spontaneously combust with no sufficient cause, no suitable explanation. But they're in a covered carriage. What happens? Materials on their body are still spontaneously combusting out of nowhere, sparking into flames. Now, how could that be the case if this is a local fire spreading to anything that it touches? These people were hundreds of yards away, if not more, from the fire. There weren't embers falling on them that they couldn't see, because like I said, they were already in the cab. So this is just one instance in Florida, and you can go look up your own city, the closest major city to you, and you'll find the same fate.
You look at destruction from World War I, World War II, it looks exactly the same. So these weapons have been around for a long time.
The biggest factor to 9/11 was the erasure of evidence.
Yep.
Erasing
Totally.
the evidence of the wrong
I was there.
of the government, the financial.
There was no remnants. Nothing. Very little.
Being destroyed. What do they call it? Jewish lightning. For lack of a better word, insurance fraud.
Wow.
Destruction of evidence. Those two typically go hand in hand.
Yep.
We're talking about buildings falling down out of thin air.
Seattle burned down, downtown. 2 months later, Ellensburg, which was at that time a major city in central Washington Territory, burned down. 2 months after that, Spokane, which was another major city on the eastern flank of the territory, burned down. And when I discovered that, I just went, hold on a second, like there's something else entirely going on in the backstory.
It's like wanting to get rid of these beautiful structures. Some are still in use, but the ones that are taken to the narrative, they just want gone. And there's also probably a component of the energy grid in all of this as well, because they keep what they use, they keep what benefits them, and at some point they determine, okay, we don't need that anymore, for whatever reason.
Part of the story of the fires is that the fire chief wasn't in town at the time. He was away at some conference. And so the command structure was broken. So the mayor at the time in Seattle was the one that was calling shots. And he was making decisions that they should go in and make what they call fire breaks between buildings, meaning actually bringing dynamite into buildings and blowing them up. And that's acknowledged. And that's acknowledged in Boston fire, in city after city, what's called a tactic to contain fires. And then they often say, well, look back in retrospect, maybe it wasn't the best idea. Well, what was causing these fires, what was causing this type of damage in the first place needs to be examined. So when you have a broken command structure and somebody else is calling the shots, that's really curious to me because that's the same thing that happened behind it.
The wildfires that swept through Maui are the deadliest in U.S. history in more than a century. On social media, people are speculating about what could have caused the fires. One
Government Accountability Office. Many countries, including the U.S., are researching their use.
Yeah, they flipped the police chief Pelletier, who was from the Vegas shooting. They made 10 emergency declarations all about Uncle Billy's and all about Banyan Drive and all this stuff. And to believe it or not, the Sunshine Law, where they removed the Sunshine Law or suspended it, it wasn't in these 10 proclamations that they really promoted and really blew up all over the news. It wasn't in any of them. It was in the quiet little affordable housing act on the side. Truly, it does look like only the places they wanted. Safeway didn't get hit. The gas stations didn't get hit. They knew what was going to go where. It's either they did it from the top of the laser energy weapon, like others say, or it came from the bottom. But one thing was crazy, that over 24 hours later, they were still letting the fire burn. And the fire was blowing so fast, the wind, it said it moved 1 mile in 10 seconds. The only thing I was thinking in my head could move 1 mile in 10 seconds. You know, some kind of boom one time, the whole place.
With the fires from Maui, I mean, I've got in my head, these rows of cars that are just completely burned.
Honestly, none of it looks like a fire. It looks like it's been destroyed with like some weapon or something from an angle. Just completely destroyed by a direct energy weapon. Just buildings sliced in half. You have melted cars. You have melted everything. I mean, it just completely looks like a war zone.
Send a laser from a directed energy weapon against the community and then step back and say, oh, that was natural, or too bad, so sad. And all those people are left homeless and they don't get any help. And people aren't being allowed to get out of there. When it's happening, they're jumping in the water and poof, and everything looks like, cars are burned out. And people are going, oh, what's going on here? And they're not getting any answers. The current administration also has a slogan of Build Back Better.
Huh.
Which was the excuse given for these other great fires. Well, everything was wood. So look what we did. We built it back with this solid brick. I think what we're seeing now was never supposed to happen. This